Hi BookTube! I'm here today to talk about one of my favorite series of all time, and that is the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. And I want to talk about why it's such an important series, not just to me, but in the fantasy canon in general. So first of all, I feel like not a lot of people have heard of Wheel of Time on BookTube. It recently has gotten a boost in popularity due to probably the TV show being announced by Amazon, and due to a few read-alongs that are going on in the BookTube community, which I'll link down below. Because of that, I want to establish that the Wheel of Time actually has a place in the fantasy canon. So the first way I want to establish it is by showing its influence on more well-known authors. So the most obvious is Brandon Sanderson, because Brandon Sanderson actually wrote the last 3 books in the Wheel of Time series after Robert Jordan passed away. He actually says that the world of Wheel of Time is part of his Cosmere, and he actually uses some characters, at least their names, in his own work, Sen and Wit. Another author that has been influenced by the Wheel of Time is the George R.R. Martin. The character of Lomas Longstrider, for example, from the world of Ice and Fire, is a nod to Jane Farstrider from the world of Wheel of Time. And he even references Robert Jordan himself in one of the houses in the Song of Ice and Fire world. It's the House Jourdain of Tor, and Tor is the publishing house of Wheel of Time. So we can see that, Wheel of Time has had an influence on these authors. I should also note that Wheel of Time is one of the best-selling fantasy series of all times. First is, obviously, Lord of the Rings. And second, until 2007, was the Wheel of Time series. The Song of Ice and Fire kind of booted it out of second position after the TV show came on. So now the Wheel of Time is the 3rd best-selling fantasy series of all time. So I think I've kind of established there, how it influenced the more well-known authors, how well the sales are doing, so it must be an important book in the canon. And I want to tell you why that's important. And it's not just because of how awesome this series is, and how important it is to me personally, but it's because of the feminist themes within the series. A lot of fantasy, from Tolkien, who had 923 named characters, only 19 of them were female, to present-day authors tend to skew towards heavily male-centered stories, with men being the more powerful sex, both politically and magically. This is not the case, however, with the Wheel of Time series, and I'm going to try and establish this in 3 ways. First of all, through the characters, second of all, through the world, and lastly, through the writing. So let's talk about how the characters of Wheel of Time make it a feminist story. Even though the main plot of the series is about Rand, a male, there are strong female characters who eventually come to equal footing story-wise. I cannot think of any of the female characters who act just as a prop for a male character. They are all fully developed characters with their own personal lives and their own motivations. For example, Egwene is one of the most powerful characters in the series. We get to see her accomplish great things, but we also get to see that she has insecurities, and that she has emotions, that she doesn't fit the stereotype of strong female character of being emotionless and, almost perfect. She has these human characteristics. We also see this in the character of Aviendha as well. She has characteristics of both stereotypically masculine features, she's literally a fighter, she's very stubborn, and some feminine features, such as being very motherly and emotional. Another great thing about Aviendha is that she's awarded sexual agency, not typical female fantasy characters. If you look at a lot of other fantasy, females are either virgins and virtued for that, or they are raped, or they are, married to men for sexual purposes. But with characters like Aviendha, she's free to do what she wants with her body, and I think that's very important. Another important note is that because these characters are powerful and flawed, they can also be unlikable. But the same thing can be said equally of the male character. The presentation of women in the Wheel of Time isn't always positive, but there are so many female characters that the character flaws are just that. They're character flaws. They're not commentary on the female sex. I'm going to put a chart in here, and I'll link my sources down below. If you look at this chart, you'll see the distribution of point of view chapters based on gender. and see that the female characters are actually given a lot more chapters than males as the series progresses. And this is important, that we not only have female characters, but we get to see things from their perspective as well. Now I want to talk about the world of Wheel of Time, and by that I kind of mean the society. Let's state the most obvious case. First here, the Aes Sedai. They are the world power. They wield political power and influence in almost every country in Randland. Now, Randland is a term that fans use to refer to kind of like the continent of the world of Wheel of Time, because it's not given an official name. So just a little point there. They act as advisors for a lot of the different rulers throughout the world. There are other nations as well which have women in top positions of power. The nation of Carian is obvious there, which only has female rulers, regardless of their ability to channel or not. So they're in power not because they can threaten you with their magical powers, but they're in power because they're female. A later nation we are introduced to, the Atheon Mier, are also consistently ruled by a female leader called the Mistress of the Ships. There's also Eudar and Arrow Domain, and lots more. On the other side of the continent, we have the Aiel, and while they're technically ruled by both a male and female figurehead, they're actually heavily influenced by the Yayad, which are the Aiel equivalent of the Aes Sedai. Even in the smaller towns like Emond's Field, we at least have women on an equal plane of power with the men. The women's circle has as much influence in the village council, and if you really look at Emond's Field closely, you can see that the real person in power there is the wisdom, Nynaeve. But also, let me point out why this is important, especially in opposition to other fantasy novels and in opposition to history. These women are in power without men. Their power is derived from themselves, and not from having married men in power, or by virtue of being the last in the line after all the men have died, or by giving birth to the male rulers. They are in power because they are women. Let's talk about the history of the Society of Wheel of Time. This world was fundamentally altered and shaped based on a disaster that male characters caused. This is a world where Adam ate the apple instead of Eve, and instead of gaining knowledge, which could arguably be a good thing, he killed 1 billion people. He caused the world to revert back beyond medieval level technology, and it was the women who had to put it all back together. The world of Wheel of Time operates on an entirely different axis of gender politics than ours, one that is, in many ways, the reverse of ours, and we see this further explored in the writing of Jordan. And now I'll talk about the writing. We have to ask the most obvious question when we talk about feminism and any form of media, and that is, does it pass the Bechdel test? If you're not aware, the Bechdel test asks 3 questions. First, does the work have at least 2 female characters? Well, there's over 2,100 characters in the Wheel of Time. 1,100 of those are female characters, so yes, there's more than 2 characters. Secondly, do these female characters have a conversation with each other? I think it would be hard to have a book with over 1,000 named female characters in it and not have them interact at any point, so yes, it ticks that box. And the last question, and most important, is there conversation about something other than a man? And then we look at the text, and it's about a male character trying to do some significant things and spread his impactful actions, but yes, the women in the book have things other than Rand to talk about, things that impact the world in much the same way. So yes, the Wheel of Time series passes the Bechdel test. Now I want to talk about how our reactions to the writing of Robert Jordan make this a feminist story. So one of the most common complaints about Jordan's writing is how fond he is of women smoothing skirts or tugging berets, and how this makes him not a great female writer. But what these people also fail to notice is how often male characters are described as tugging mustaches or fingering the phallic symbols at their waists. Swords. How can you miss that, constantly being referenced to as well? Why do we concentrate on just the female characteristics and not the male characteristics here, I ask? Could this be a reflection of our own sexism affecting our reading? Let's take a closer look. Another criticism is that the women often think disparaging thoughts against men about how incompetent they are and how women should be empowered to the exclusion of men. One person actually wrote this following quote in a forum. They consistently belittle men, are aggressive on the flimsiest pretexts, and generally act like stereotypical, foaming at the mouth bra burners, and none of them are ever called out on it. Belittling, aggressive, stereotypical, not being called out on it. Just let that sit with you for a little while. Think about this. If the genders were reversed, would you notice these things as much? Especially as a reader reading this series for the first time in the 1990s. If the men were saying these things, I don't think you'd notice it as much. The flipping of the genders and of the sexism throws a big red flag into your face because it is so alien to our own reality. And what's the result of this? Women aren't pushovers. They aren't afraid to boss men around. They aren't afraid to point out their mistakes. And the men respect them and take them seriously. There is in-universe sexism, and it's supposed to be seen as sexist. And I think the people complaining about these haven't made it beyond, say, the third book in the series. Because what we do eventually see is characters like Nynaeve and Egwene and Aviendha maturing and growing beyond their sexism, as the male characters also mature and grow beyond their sexism as well. At the beginning of the series, these sexist stereotypes can be annoying. And they're supposed to be annoying. But with the series, we get to see the growth of these characters because they're not stagnant, they're realistic. There's 14 volumes. There has to be something going on, with the character growth. And I'd also argue that Robert Jordan is very, very good at characterization, at making his characters feel real. And part of that is starting them off as flawed characters and having them grow beyond those flaws. So those are my arguments. And I can see the arguments that you're going to come back at me with. And I'm just going to say the Wheel of Time is not perfect. There are plenty of legitimate criticisms of the series in regards to both gender and sexuality. But it works as a shock to the fantasy genre to start being better in our treatment of women. Jordan actually says through Moraine that men and women are each at their most powerful when they are working together. And the world of Wheel of Time, by reversing the gender disparity from our own world, exposes our own faults and posits a world where working towards real equality is a possibility and a good thing. So those are my thoughts on the Wheel of Time. Let me know your own thoughts on the series, and thank you for watching.